You see it as not money that is going to the government. It's just going through the government. Giving people money helps people have more money. It's not everything you need, but it's a structure of reliability that you can build things on top of. Everyone has basic needs and everyone has potential. All the inefficiency in the system we have now, what it really means is human suffering.
I'm here with Conrad Shaw, or the UBI guy, as he's known on Twitter, who is the manager of the Bootstraps Basic Income Trial, which we'll get into discussing, I'm sure, as well as the creator of UBI Calculator and a co-founder of Kingle. So quite the expert in the field of UBI. So I wanted to sit down with him and talk about what UBI really means, what it looks like, and why it's something we seriously need to consider implementing in America heading forward, or all around the globe, hopefully. So Conrad, for the uninitiated, could you give us a quick rundown on what UBI is, what it looks like?
UBI stands for either unconditional or universal basic income. And essentially it's the premise of a social contract where we guarantee everyone an income floor. Like everyone starts at a certain amount of income. And under most proposals that would come through a federal program, sort of like like a weekly paycheck for the job of living and being an American citizen or wherever you are. I guess it doesn't have to be in America.
So what do you think, in your opinion, is the strongest argument for implementing something like UBI?
What you find in these pilots that you run is, yes, poverty is effectively eliminated below the point of the UBI. Um, but you also see people, starting businesses and pursuing art and spending time with their family and like becoming much better versions of themselves, finding better jobs, taking better care of their kids, all kinds of stuff that it's way more than just stopping desperation. It's unleashing potential.
Awesome. And that's very interesting. You spoke to trials and stuff. I saw on your Twitter and a bit on the website that I was looking that you had managed the Bootstraps Trial, which was something that had to do with basic income. Is that something you could speak on a little? Maybe some of the successes you saw with it? How much were you giving people? What did you see having
Sure.
worked firsthand with it?
Sure. Well, the Bootstraps trial was very unique in that it wasn't designed to be a large qualitative or quantitative study. We didn't have a lot of participants. It was designed specifically for use of a docuseries that we're making to tell a wide range of stories. So it's a qualitative study. So there were 20 people involved in the trial across 10 different states from all different backgrounds, from um, no income to middle class. And we picked people that would allow us to have a glimpse at a lot of the different issues going on in the US: trans rights, indigenous rights, and medical issues, homelessness, whatever, we found compelling and we found a good cast for. And the people were getting 1,000 a month adult and 333 a month per kid, but distributed on a weekly basis. We filmed with them for 2.5 years and just to see what they did. And this wasn't about advocating for UBI. It was really about investigating it. Like, does it work? Not proving that it works.
Yeah, so I'm sure you don't want to give too much away without people having seen the docuseries, but having done it, did you see the successes you were expecting? Was it drastically different? How was the turnout, kind of? Without, you don't have to give too much away.
hmm yeah, I mean, I was already sort of convinced that giving people money helps people have more money, and especially when it has no conditions. And I expected things to be positive, but also we picked stories that would be scarier stories, like people with drug abuse history, people with criminal record, among our stories, so that we would be testing the different angles. And I expected some people to, struggle more. And I expected things to take longer. We picked 2.5 years because we figured, a 1 year amount of time where you're getting some money is enough time to kind of stop some bleeding in your life. And 2 years, you can start making moves. A real UBI would be permanent, and so we would expect a different outcome. But um, what was surprising to me was just how quickly it sort of unleashed people. Like, I started using that word unleashed after, we saw what happened, is how immediately people started attacking the obstacles that they'd been ignoring, the things that had been too daunting to look at in their finances or in their life, or how they started pursuing the dreams and aspirations that they had, that they'd been putting off until a time when they felt better. Like pretty quickly, within the first 3 months, the idea went from being just a regular film, and we'd show like some of the more, like three of the three most interesting stories. Pretty quickly, it was like, no, all these people are doing a lot all the time, and this is a series.
Yeah, and that goes quite into a lot of the things that I try to, when I'm explaining these things to people, that positive liberty, like giving people the ability to act on their wants and needs, desires, is much more the kind of freedom that is actual freedom rather than negative liberty, which is removing restrictions. So going deeper into UBI, I'm sure one of the main pushbacks you get when you bring it up is cost. Even time I mention it, what I hear the most is cost, price tag, what's it going to cost taxpayers? And I wanted to touch on that with you because I was reading some of the articles you wrote on UBI, and I saw that in one of them, you mentioned how the $3.2 trillion price tag that we see is an overreach and it's not like the actual cost because of what would be given back, and how the actual cost is somewhere closer to $900 billion. Could you kind of explain that for the viewers?
I mean, the devil's in the details, and it depends on how you fund it. So if you want to fund it by just minting money and giving it to everybody, then the cost is the number of people times the amount of dollars they're each getting. But that's not a very smart way to do a basic income. The way to really understand a basic income is as a redistributive mechanism, where it's coupled with a taxation, and generally a taxation that'll fall more heavily on the wealthy, or things that you don't want, like pollution, you know. But essentially, what I tried to do with the calculator I developed, the ubicalculator.com that you mentioned,
Mhm.
is show what the economic costs and outcomes we could expect, both for individual households as well as the economy at large, under different proposals. Like, what if we paid for it with a flat tax? What if we, took money from this part of the budget? What if we just did it with deficit spending, or we minted money? Like, what does it look like? You can make a revenue neutral program that just means you're taxing enough from the public to essentially shift the money, and it becomes um so the 900 billion is an estimate based on one of those proposals, where essentially the 3.2 trillion is the first money everyone's getting, right? The US government has the ability to just give everyone that money. They mint the money basically, and then they can tax it back, um, and make that effective net transfer much smaller. It's like if you go to the store and you buy a candy bar and it's $2, and you'd only have a 10. So you give them $10 and they give you $8 back. You didn't pay $10, you paid two. But there was a moment where you gave them $10 and then you got eight back. That's essentially what's happening, is an accounting mechanism where the government is giving people the money up front, and then taking it back in taxes later. So it's the government waiting for that trend, for that accounting maneuver to happen, rather than what we have now, which is when we do qualify and um, for people for benefits, they're standing in line and applying for welfare, seeing if they get it, and this entire time they're like on the edge of eviction or trying to feed their kids, and we're making them be the ones that are waiting for the money on that end of the transaction.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a really good way to put it, kind of the giving a gas station $10 and it only costs you two, so you are going to get $8 back. A lot of it is coming back into your pockets. It's just upfront cost to get the program started, kind of. Another good question about cost that was brought up to me that I wanted to pose to you is, would implementing a UBI, would there be some sort of like an overhead administrative cost, kind of how we see like in healthcare, where we're paying like for insurance, but then also we have to pay for the administration to run everything? Like if everyone got $1,000 a month in UBI, would the cost be $1,000 a month, or would there be additional cost to fund the program?
The cost of implementation. So if you see it as not money that is going to the government, it's just going through the government, essentially. It's money going from people to people and the government's the pass through. There there's still an administrative burden of, setting up the program that does the transfer. Um, but unlike, with all the other programs that are sort of paternalistic or bureaucratic, where you need an entire staff of people to like determine who qualifies and monitor if they're using the funds correctly, there are no conditions, there are no qualifications, and everyone qualifies. So the only task that the administration is burdened with is actually sending the money. And if there's one thing the government actually is good at doing efficiently, it's sending money. One of the closest programs we have to a basic income is Social Security. Social Security is a little bit like a basic income for senior citizens. And Social Security stands out among government programs as having way lower overhead. The administrative burden for Social Security is about 1% of their total costs, or it's under 1% now. And UBI would be lower, considering that it has even fewer, you know, things to work out as like who gets what, who gets how much. It's basically just pass the money through to everyone, everyone gets the same check once a week, once a month, whatever it is.
Yeah, that's perfect. I think that answers my question really well because without the lack of requirements, restrictions, there's not going to be people needed pointlessly to hire to, oh, let's just make sure everyone's staying on board because it's something universal. Another question that I wanted to pose you, I guess not necessarily a pushback, but as for myself, as someone who's on the left, who is more open to social programs, my thoughts on UBI has always been somewhere along the lines of I'm open to it, but for me, like universal health care, guaranteed housing, subsidized childcare, were always kind of like priorities. My thought being if we had these necessities easier to get, maybe a UBI would be less needed. So what would the argument be from you to someone like me who might be open to UBI as to why it should be the focus rather than these other programs?
Well, I would never put it to you as in it should be the focus. Rather, I might suggest that it's
Like a priority.
a top priority. I kind of put UBI and universal healthcare in that same bucket because they're both essentially when I think of what people need, I build up from the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy, and you need your safety and security. Um, and in a lot of cases that it's your food and your shelter and things like that. In a lot of cases, the easiest and most efficient way to get that to people is to put cash in their hands. But that's not true with certain things like healthcare. If you just give people money, the healthcare system is very extortive. It's a market that is inelastic, essentially meaning, the healthcare provider, based on the urgency of your need, can charge you way more than it costs them to provide it because you're not gonna like walk away and say, I'll pass on living.
Yeah.
Um, so I think healthcare and UBI are very similar, and I would push for them together. One thing that UBI does is because it's not in kind, because money can go to solve whatever the person who's getting it uh needs help with, and it's so much more flexible. I think it's crucial to get it in place at first. And what I think will happen when you have a UBI in place is you have more of that positive liberty at play that allows people to do things like volunteer more, but also be an activist more. People who are fighting these fights for universal health care and fighting climate change and pollution and housing battles and labor battles. Essentially, it all boils down to can they take the time and not get paid at work while they're doing it. So if you have a system where people aren't absolutely tied to their job by, the income they earn from it, also from the healthcare that we tie to it, um, we can push for a lot more of these other changes much more quickly. I describe UBI often as a foundation because both in your personal life, you can build everything upon that foundation. It's not everything you need, but it's a structure of reliability that you can build things on top of. Similarly, a society needs a foundation of just general agency and support for its people so that it can build its other support programs on top of it, not in such a way that they're trying to fill everyone's shortfall and everyone's needs with in-kind aid. Because in-kind aid, if you're trying to get people food, if you're trying to get people housing, you have to have these long conversations and vetting processes to be like, okay, what kind of housing does this person need? How many kids are in the family? But do they have an allergy or whatever? Whereas if you give them cash, they just go to the store and get the thing that they need. And as long as we have a competitive, and we still need regulation to make sure we have competitive and fair markets. But if that's in place, then money can take the place much more efficiently of all kinds of in-kind aid.
And I think there's something to be said also about how I'm, like you said, having more time to be an activist, having more time to focus on these things. It could go even deeper. Like if the McDonald's worker wasn't so scared of homelessness, not being able to eat, not being able to have healthcare, pay his bills, he might be able to go to school and become a doctor or do something that might contribute to society more so than the job he settled on because he needed some sort of an income to work to afford to live pretty much. So I do think
Right.
that is one of the strongest arguments for UBI. When I was watching your interviews on the matter, another point that I saw you drive home that I thought was a great point was how making it a political issue isn't really the right way to frame it. Could you kind of explain that here, how it's more like a human issue?
uh, Trying to find systems level solutions that work. And engineering is not political. You're just trying to find something that meets your goals. Um, and the thing that, so the first thing that spoke to me was just the elegance of the mechanism of the idea. Like, we have enough money. This is the easiest way to get it to people. Way more efficient, way fewer people left out. Like, all the inefficiency in the system we have now, what it really means is human suffering and needless human suffering and waste and lack of and opportunity cost. And then on the political side, um, when I was first introduced to the idea, it was like 2016. I posted on Facebook about it. You know how you have certain friends that they just disagree with you on every single thing, like your political opposites, and so along comes my friend Mike, and I'm gearing up for like, oh God, here we're gonna go again,
Yeah.
and it was and he was just like, oh yeah, I can see giving money to families. Yeah, that makes sense, and it was just like instant. It was easy, and I've found over and over again that if you just present it from where someone's at and say, no, this is money for you, for your family, for your kids. It's a baseline of just, you know, independence, security, and you put it in their terms. It has nothing to do with like attacking someone's values about anyone. The universal truth is everyone has basic needs and everyone has potential, and it's an investment in those basic needs and that potential. And that's a non-political statement. And so the approach that we've been taking, while I think the North Star policy would be a governmental policy someday, is this idea, along with every other idea that exists right now, has been made so political and so politicized, um, like out of absurdity. It's like, to me, basic income is not a leftist idea. To me, basic income is a pragmatic idea that can appeal to libertarians, conservatives, progressives, liberals, just all in kind. And the only people it doesn't really appeal to are the power hoarders.
Mhm.
Um, and so our approaches with our projects has been uh to try to do it in a very non-politicized way. So like the participants in our Bootstraps pilot we're we're more diverse across the political spectrum too. And the Commingle that we're building is a tool that is truly universal. Anyone can join. Doesn't matter who you voted for. It's just, we're all chipping in money, we're all getting money back, and it's whoever needs it gets the most. And that never it doesn't matter what you think at all. It's just a mechanism for making sure you have money because everyone needs some.
Yeah, and I heard you mention commingle. Could you speak kind of to what that is and why you think it's an important step towards getting to a full UBI?
Commingle is the idea is that it can help show that by being the first essentially governmental style model. because it comes with its own taxations or tithing mechanism, whatever you want to call it, where everyone's actually chipping in essentially an income tax based, voluntarily, if they want to try this, and everyone puts in 7% of their income, and each week, and then that money goes into a pot and gets divided up and goes back out in equal share. So what that ends up doing is it takes so the further you are above the average income of the group, the more you're giving in, up to 7 or close to 7%. And the further you are below the average income of the group, the more you're getting out, up to the full amount of that week's payout. And so it helps people understand, like, this is the heartbeat of income security. It is effectively, and elegantly targeting the people who need it the most, by how much they need it.
Yeah, and that's a wonderful way to put it, with those with the ability to those with the need. To wrap up with it, I want to ask, what do you think is next for the UBI movement going forward in terms of legitimizing itself as a concept?
I mean, that's a big part of what we're trying to do. I think so we are going to be pushing pretty hard with both the docuseries and Commingle, hopefully around the end of 2024, with a campaign. Um, there's also there's mayors for a guaranteed income, counties for a guaranteed income. There's a lot of people pushing on tangentially related ideas and trying to get these concepts out there. I'm excited about something in Oregon. There's the Oregon People's Rebate, where they're putting it actually on the referendum, where they would raise the corporate taxes, which are low in Oregon, and they would take that revenue to give everyone a universal check. And it's a pretty special precedent, or I guess second precedent. It's similar to there's one in Alaska that's similar based on oil money, but this would be based on corporate taxation, and it would be another state that provides every single one of its citizens, man, woman, and child, with a certain amount of money unconditionally every year. And getting stuff in place like that is super powerful. And then the other sleeper things that I'm going to be keeping an eye on is if we can get a carbon tax and a dividend passed. That's historically has bipartisan support, and it effectively is a basic income, where it's a carbon tax where the money goes back to everybody
Mhm.
as a dividend. And then the other thing is, I think across the board, we should all be supporting the idea of federal banks or postal banks. Because that being unbanked is just, a sort of a tragedy in this country, and there's no reason we need to do it. And if we took that step without even mentioning the word UBI, we would have built the infrastructure upon which we could deliver a UBI. So it would be a great win.
I do want to give you the opportunity, if there's any points I didn't ask you about, I didn't cover, if you want to maybe shout out any of the projects you're working on or anything like that to wrap up, you can go ahead before we end the interview.
I mean, I could go on for hours about points.
Yeah.
If you guys want to follow along with some of the stuff we're doing or check it out, I would go to itsafoundation.org is a nice place to see connections to the Bootstraps project and Commingle and all the links in there, and follow those and learn about the different projects and what we're thinking of doing. So it stands for Income to Support All Foundation. So it's a
Good
foundation.org.
name. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. And thank you again. We were trying to be a little more brief, keep it under 30 minutes for this one, but hopefully this was really informative. So maybe going forward, we could sit down and touch on some points we didn't get in this one. But again, thank you for taking the time to speak with me today.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. And until next time, I hope you enjoy your weekend.